done the job over and over again and you've mastered it. So when you go into the attorney's office, into the conference room, you know exactly what you're going to do. The only possible interesting part of it is the actual deposition. You know, did you kill 29,000 people? Yes. Did you enjoy it? And so on. I'm making it up, obviously, because I've been deposed in the past. All right. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to share with you two film scenes, one from the classic Charlie Chaplin Modern Times, and the other one from Joe versus the Volcano. We're going to reanalyze the scene that we had already looked at. We're going to work with the two film scenes that I've chosen for this unit, and the one from Joe versus the Volcano, we already had seen the section that I'm going to use, but I want to do something different with it here than we did a couple of weeks ago. But the first one comes from a 1936 black and white film directed by Charlie Chaplin called Modern Times. And if you have never seen this film, it is in the top 100 of classics. It was Chaplin's last film. He made another one after it, but that was a talkie that was really quite terrible, so he's generally credited with this one as his final film. And he wrote and directed the film, and he wrote the music, did all kinds of stuff. This man was a genius, even though he was kind of a funky character in a whole lot of other parts of his life. But this is a satire, and he is making fun of assembly line technology of the 1920s and the 1930s. He was a person who would react to his social environment in a critical way, and he had the opportunity to make films that had statements to make about what he observed in society. He works in a factory, and as you're going to see in a moment, the only thing he does, this is page 136 of the film book, sorry. The only thing he does is tighten some bolts, and I'm going to do this in stages. That is, we'll stop it, and I have to turn the lights back up so that for the camera recording we have enough light. And there's a couple of issues here. One is, and it's in the questions, of predicting the motivating potential score for the jobs that you see. Instead of just straightforward predicting it, I'd like you to use the questionnaire that I gave you and rate Charlie's job on each of the 5 core dimensions. And then we'll talk about that part of it. The questions use a 7-point scale, so there's a difference between what it says there and what the survey or questionnaire says. So ignore the 7-point scale, and we will use a 5-point scale. And then watch the work context that Charlie works in, and everything counts. This is a factory. You assess the noise level, assess the interaction with coworkers, assess the interaction with a supervisor. And I think it's clear who is who. The people Charlie is working right next to while he's tightening the bolts, is 2 of them and 1 who is operating a lever. Those are his coworkers. This is page 136 of the film book. The supervisor is a guy who comes up behind the group and makes a comment or does something. And then, what do you think is Charlie's reaction? That is, I'll stop it and say, how does Charlie feel at this point? It's kind of an indirect assessment of his internal psychological health and his internal motivation and the like. So let's go ahead, and Robert, we'll go ahead and play the film. Okay, pause for a moment. How do you rate Charlie's job on those 5 dimensions? 3 MPS?
No, I'm just being sarcastic.
Oh. Just think of yourself.
Just monotonous. I mean, it's quite.
It's unbelievably
like
monotonous.
Brain drain.
Say it again?
Like brain drain. He's doing this tightening bolt all day.
Yeah, he's doing it over and over again. What would you give the NPS?
3, 1.
Usually maxes out at 10. And occasionally we get, well, that's why I reacted to the 5 for your job, because I knew what Charlie usually gets for this job. Do we already see possible negative effects from the design of this work? What are they? The answer is yes, but what are they?
There's no growth. There's no motivation. I mean, you are stuck in this like Groundhog Day where it's just it's over like the whole.
That's a film. Is that what you're? I've never seen it. Maybe I have. Do you notice, or did you notice, that Charlie kept working at approximately the same pace? And when he slowed down, something happened, correct? And what was it that happened when he slowed down?
Well, he'd get behind or something bad would happen down the line from him.
That's right. The coworker would come up and kick him in the rear, or point to the place. It got so bad at one point that the coworker called for the supervisor, and the supervisor stopped the line, and it was getting out of hand. Now, this is an example where the amount of work output, which is the number of items that have been secured with the wrench and then hammered with the hammer and the tool, the number of items that gets done happens despite the intrinsic motivation of the worker. Did you also notice that Charlie is turning the wrench in opposite directions? Yeah. I love that. It's totally unexplained. I mean, it's just a part of the satire of this sequence. He's doing complete nonsense. And yet the workers are taking... Because if you watch it, and you'll see it again, I think he changes it in the next sequence, where it becomes a little bit more, the pattern is the same wrenching direction. How would you assess the supervisory relationship in this group? Is it positive or negative? And what is the evidence? The plant manager, let's separate. You have the foreman right on the line. That's the guy who came up from behind and stood behind the three workers that are on the line. The plant manager, in turn, is doing something else. What is he asking the operator to do? Speed up the line. If he speeds up the line, the workers have to work at a higher pace, but get therefore more output, presuming that the output is of equivalent quality. So you have three levels of analysis. One are the individual workers like Charlie and the motivational effect on them, the relationship among the co-workers, the relationship of Charlie and the co-workers to the immediate foreman, and the relationship to the larger factory. Okay. Now, let's take it a little bit further. All right. What was the negative effect? No, let me rephrase it. I perceived a negative effect on Charlie's behavior from the repeated motion of turning the wrenches. What was the effect?
His body kept doing it.
It's a repeated motion syndrome. And there is such a thing. And it's when you are doing like key punch jobs or anything where you're key entry jobs and you're using your hands and your body in a repeated way. It was satirical in 1936. They did not have, as far as I know, the term repeated motion syndrome then. It's more of a diagnosis that came in our times. But there he gives the supervisor the wrenches and he turns and his body is still twitching and he finally gets it into place and he goes into the bathroom to smoke a cigarette. And then the supervisor comes back on and tells him, the plant manager or owner comes back on and tells him to go back to work. What did Charlie do that we could call a compensatory behavior in reaction to this routine work? And he did it right after he came out of the bathroom.
He stalled. I mean, what he did is he played the foreman and telling him, oh, you missed the spot.
Yeah, exactly. The foreman knows he has to tighten the bolts. And he's as tied to the line as Charlie was before he left to take a break. when Charlie comes back, he is basically trying to give himself some break time by not getting back on the line immediately. Now, the sequence that comes in at this point, and I don't care to use it today, if you can imagine a person, an inventor, coming in with an automatic feeding machine where you can feed Charlie or any of your workers while they're on the line, and it's automatic, and it puts food into the person's mouth. Have you seen the film?
No.
Has anybody seen the film in here? Nobody. Oh, this is a piece of art. I'm sorry, I get excited about these things. All right, Joe versus the volcano, page 134. Now, you've already seen this, but I want to put this in the context of job design and both the actual design of Joe's job and the work context, the context within which he works. And in the work context, everything counts. Lighting, the physical environment, coworkers. Remember, there were two coworkers in that environment. One was the guy off to the left, and the other was Meg Ryan's character. Supervisory relationships, Mr. Wattori, you recall him, and the relationship between Wattori and Joe Banks. You want to assess it using the job characteristics section and the moderator variable section for Joe's job. And I think that will be enough. Okay. Joe, how would you rate your job in MPS? 5. A 5? Well, it's going to compete with his job. You would say it's low. Minimally, it's low. He does not appear to have any level of motivation at all. Now, this scene shows the double whammy effect of jobs that are low in MPS and a work context that is possibly problematic. How would you assess Joe Banks' work context? And what specific items in that context would you take into account? I have a list that I made while watching it that has 11 or 12 items on it. So, Joe, what did you notice in your work context?
I noticed he was feeling sick.
Well, he's feeling sick before he arrived.
Yeah, it almost looks like he might be getting sick in that environment he works in. It looks like a really dirty environment to work in.
Okay, keep going. I want you to get extremely specific. There's a section beginning on page 200 that deals with the contextual factors. And I'm using this film scene to anchor that section because the context screams at you. As soon as Joe opens the door, you see the work context. And you're correct in your observation, but I want you to get specific about the items in the work context. Yes, sir.
Chunky milk and the light when he first comes in, he's got the boss. I know we can get the job, but can we do the job? And he's just yelling at it. It just kind of puts that boss figure immediately in before he even says anything to Joe.
Okay, good. Now stay with that sound in the background. You arrive at work, and Mr. Wattori is talking to Frank or Hank or whatever his name is, and he's repeating over and over again in a high and loud voice whatever he said, and I didn't have to quote it, but you're correct. So that's work context. How about the coworkers? Yes, Jesus.
All the coworkers are just like him. They don't want to be there. They keep to themselves.
The one guy off on the side, as we noted before, is just sort of hunkered over, and we know from the sequel or the sequence that comes later that he's sort of energized by the idea of change. And Meg Ryan's character is seated there with bad posture in front of an old typewriter that makes a lot of noise. And you can hear the sound of the typing. So that's in the work context. More. Keep going. One right after the other.
The coat rack.
The coat rack. Simple item. He hangs up his hat, it falls on the floor. Yes?
Coffee.
The coffee and the creamer that coagulates, which is the comment he made. The lighting above the coffee.
Her inhaler too, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. She has her inhaler, and she's sniffing. she's all clogged up, and she's sitting there typing, and they deliver